The year is 1588, and the stone walls of Whitehall Palace are breathing a damp, winter chill that no amount of royal charcoal can fully chase away. You are standing in the private bedchamber of the most powerful woman in the world, but as the first grey light of dawn rakes across the floor, you don't see a legend. You see a survivor. Elizabeth is 55 years old, a woman who has outlived her mother's execution, her sister's wrath, and a dozen plots against her life. But today, her greatest battle is the 24-hour ritual of being a queen. Before the crown is placed, there is the lead, the vinegar, and the crushing weight of the great silence. Before we begin this reality check, if you find solace in these quiet journeys through the grit of the past, consider subscribing to our field guide. It ensures you never miss a night's escape into the untold chapters of history. Tonight, we leave the gold leaf myths behind. We are going to live one day in the gritty sensory reality of the last Tudor. Take a deep breath, settle into the shadows of the palace. Let's begin. The silence of Whitehall at 5 in the morning is not a peaceful silence. It is heavy, cold, and thick with the scent of 500 years of secrets. In the darkness of the privy chamber, the air tastes of stale wood smoke and the faint, metallic tang of damp stone. There is no central heat here, no modern comforts, only the flickering remains of a fire that has burned down to glowing orange ribs in the hearth. Listen closely. Behind the ornate oak panels, the palace is alive. The scratching of mice is a constant companion to a Tudor queen. They move through the void between the timber and the stone, indifferent to the woman sleeping in the massive four-poster bed. On the floor, the rushes, the dried grass used as a primitive carpet, are stale. They haven't been changed in weeks. They trap the dust, the spilled ale from a midnight snack, and the dirt tracked in by the boots of the Great Watch. To us, it would smell of decay. To Elizabeth, it is simply the smell of home. Under the heavy silk quilts, the Queen stirs. At 55, her body feels the dampness of the Thames more than it used to. Every joint carries the weight of 1588, the year of the Spanish Armada, a year of existential dread. But as she opens her eyes, her first thought isn't of ships or cannons. It is of the Tower. Elizabeth never forgets that she is a woman who was once a prisoner. She remembers the rain-slick steps of Traitor's Gate. She remembers the sound of the iron bolt sliding shut when she was only 21, sent there by her half-sister Mary. In the Tudor world, the distance between a throne and an axe is only a few inches of cold steel. That knowledge is the grit factor that has kept her alive, while so many others, her mother Anne Boleyn, her cousins, her rivals, have lost their heads to the block. She is the Virgin Queen, a title that sounds romantic in poetry, but is a calculated, gritty political trade in reality. She traded the warmth of a husband and the hope of children for the cold safety of the crown. To marry was to surrender power to a man. To remain alone was to remain the sun around which England orbited. As she lies there in the raking grey light, she is a woman of contradictions. She is the sun of England, yet she wakes in a room that smells of damp straw. She is the most feared monarch in Europe, yet she is haunted by the ghosts of a mother she never knew, and a father whose shadow still looms over the halls of Whitehall. The raking light catches the dust motes dancing in the air, thousands of tiny particles of skin and fabric spinning in the cold. In a few moments, the great silence of the night will be broken. the ladies of the bedchamber will enter. The mask will be applied. The queen will be built layer by layer, out of silk, lead, and iron will. But for now, in the 5 a.m. gloom, she is just Elizabeth, a survivor of the tower, listening to the mice, waiting for the day to demand her soul once again. The great silence of the early morning is shattered not by a scream, but by the soft rhythmic rustle of silk and the clicking of latches. At 7 o'clock, the privy chamber transforms from a cold, hollow stone box into a factory of artifice. This is the toilette, a word that suggests a simple cleaning, but in 1588, for Elizabeth Tudor, it is a military mobilization. The Queen does not simply dress, she is constructed. As the ladies of the bedchamber enter, those few women allowed to see the monarch in her most vulnerable, unadorned state, the air in the room changes. The smell of the dying fire is overtaken by a sharper, more clinical scent, the pungent sting of wine vinegar and the earthy, metallic odour of pulverized minerals. Elizabeth sits before a polished steel mirror. In the flickering candlelight, her face is a map of her survival. She is 55, and the toll of her reign is etched into her skin. Most notably, there are the pitted scars, the craters left behind by the smallpox that nearly killed her in 1562. To the world, she must be the eternal virgin, a flawless icon of English stability. But here, in the cold morning light, she is reminded that her flesh is as fragile as any subject's. The ritual begins with the mask of state. This is the application of Venetian ceruse, a cosmetic made by mixing white lead with vinegar. In 2026, we recognize this as a slow-acting poison, but for Elizabeth, it is a necessary armor. The grit factor of this moment is the physical sensation. Imagine a thick, cold paste being smeared across your forehead, cheeks, and neck. It is not light like modern makeup. It is heavy like wet plaster. As it dries, it tightens, pulling at the skin and settling into the smallpox scars. It creates a deathly porcelain pallor that masks her exhaustion, her age, and her humanity. This leaden mask is toxic. It seeps into her pores, slowly eating away at the very skin it seeks to beautify, causing further greying and decay, a vicious cycle of Tudor vanity and survival. As the brush strokes move near her eyes, Elizabeth's mind often drifts back to the year 1536, the year the artifice began. She was only 2 years old when her mother, Anne Boleyn, was led to the scaffold at the Tower of London. Though she was too young to remember the event, the lesson of it became the foundation of her soul. Anne Boleyn had been the Rose of England, a woman of wit and beauty, yet her head had fallen because she couldn't provide a male heir. Elizabeth grew up in a court where a woman's head was never truly safe. She saw her stepmother, Catherine Howard, follow the same bloody path to the block. She learned that for a woman in power, flawlessness is not a luxury. It is a requirement for survival. If she appeared weak, if she appeared old, if she appeared human, the vultures of the court would begin to circle. The white lead is not just hiding scars, it is hiding her vulnerability. It is a signal to her advisors, her enemies in Spain, and her own people. The Queen does not age. The Queen does not bleed. The Queen is an institution. Next comes the spirits of Saturn, a lip pomade made of red cinnabar, which is essentially mercury. It is dabbed onto her lips to create a vivid, bloody contrast against the white lead. The mercury, like the lead, is a silent killer. causing tremors and memory loss over decades of use. As she stares into the mirror, her mouth becomes a bright red wound on a snow-white field. While the makeup sets, her ladies begin the great unveiling of the wardrobe. Elizabeth's natural hair is thinning now, a casualty of age and the toxic chemicals she uses daily. To remedy this, a wig of tightly curled, vibrant red hair is pinned to her scalp. It is uncomfortable, itchy and hot, but it is the signature of the Tudor brand. This is the moment where the grit of the past meets the biography of a legend. Every layer added to her body, the chemise, the stiffened bodice, the heavy sleeves, is a layer of protection against a world that wants to consume her. She remembers being declared a bastard by her own father, King Henry VIII. She remembers being pushed to the edges of the succession, a forgotten girl in a drafty country house. Now, as the ladies tighten the laces of her corset, she feels the same restriction she felt as a princess in the tower. The corset is reinforced with wood or bone busks, pushing her ribs inward and her spirit upward. It is difficult to take a full breath. The mask of state is now dry. It is stiff on her face, making it difficult to smile or show genuine emotion. By 8 a.m., the woman is gone. What remains is a statue, a white-faced, red-haired, iron-ribbed monarch ready to face a council of men who, despite her 40-year reign, still wonder if a woman can truly lead an army. She stands up, her body encased in a shell of silk and poison. The lead is in her blood. The memory of the axe is in her mind. She is ready for the day. By 9 o'clock, the sun has risen high enough to strike the tall, leaded glass windows of Whitehall, but the light it casts is cold and uncompromising. In the Queen's bedchamber, the air is thick with the scent of lavender-scented starch and the heavy, metallic smell of the silver and gold thread that lies heaped upon the cedar tables. The mask of state is dry now, a brittle porcelain layer on Elizabeth's skin, but the most grueling part of her physical transformation is only just beginning. In 2026, we think of fashion as an expression of self. For Elizabeth I, fashion is a form of structural engineering. It is the process of burying the woman beneath the monument. The first layer is the smock, a simple linen shift meant to protect the expensive fabrics from the oils of the skin. But quickly, the grit of Tudor reality begins to tighten its grip. Next comes the stay, or the corset. In the late 16th century, these were not the flexible garments of later eras. They were reinforced with busks, flat, rigid stays made of wood, whalebone, or even hammered iron. As two ladies of the bedchamber take the laces, Elizabeth grips the bedpost. The grit factor here is the sound and the sensation. You hear the rhythmic creak snap of the laces pulling taut. You feel the busk pressing directly against the sternum and the floating ribs. It is designed to create a perfectly flat, conical torso, the shape of a shield. It forces the shoulders back and the chest forward, making a deep, natural breath an impossibility. Every inhale is shallow, restricted to the very top of the lungs. For Elizabeth, who suffered from bouts of breathlessness and a chronic cough, this daily constriction is a slow, methodical torture. But the biography of the Queen is written in these laces. She is 55 years old, and her body is tired. Yet the corset tells the world that the Virgin Queen is as unyielding as the oak of an English ship. She cannot slouch. She cannot bend. She cannot show the fatigue that gnaws at her bones. By constricting her body, she signals the stability of her realm. If the Queen's body is a fortress, England is safe. Next comes the farthingale, the massive, wheel-like structure made of wood or wire that sits at her hips. It is an awkward, skeletal contraption that instantly triples her horizontal footprint. This is the symbolism of power in its most physical form. The farthingale ensures that no one, not even her most trusted advisor, can stand within 3 feet of her without her permission. It creates a physical dead zone of royalty. Then, the gown itself is brought forward. This is not mere clothing. It is a 40-pound suit of velvet armour. In 1588, the Spanish Armada year, Elizabeth's gowns were often encrusted with thousands of seed pearls, rubies, and table-cut diamonds. The sleeves alone, padded with horsehair and lined with stiff buckram, weigh as much as a modern winter coat. As the velvet is lowered over her head, the weight settles onto her shoulders. Imagine the sensation of a heavy, lead-lined X-ray apron combined with the heat of a thick winter quilt. Under the weight of the gold thread, Elizabeth's spine compresses. Every step she takes requires a calculated shift of her centre of gravity. To walk in a Tudor gown is not to stroll, it is to glide with a heavy, swinging momentum. This brings us to the grit of her daily movement. Because of the farthingale and the weight of the skirts, Elizabeth cannot see her own feet. She must navigate the uneven, rush-covered stone floors of the palace by memory and feel. One trip, one stumble, and the icon is shattered. She must move with the grace of a swan, while underneath the silk, her legs are working with the intensity of an athlete. Behind this physical struggle lies the shadow of her father, Henry VIII. Henry was a man of immense physical presence, a giant who dominated every room. Elizabeth, as a woman, had to find a way to project that same greatness without the benefit of height or muscle. She chose to do it through volume and light. By wearing gowns that shimmered with real silver and extended her frame into the room, she became a visual sun. When she entered a hall, the candlelight didn't just hit her. It was magnified by her. But the reality check of 1588 is that this icon is in pain. The lead makeup on her face is beginning to itch, but she cannot scratch it without cracking the mask. The wooden busk is bruising the skin over her ribs. The heavy pearls are pulling at the fabric, which in turn pulls at her neck and shoulders. She looks at her reflection. She no longer sees Elizabeth Tudor, the girl who once hid in the shadows of Hatfield House, terrified that the next knock on the door would be her arrest warrant. She sees Gloriana. She sees the woman who, just months ago at Tilbury, stood before her troops and promised to live or die amongst them all. As the final partlet, the lace neck covering, is pinned into place with sharp brass pins, the transformation is complete. She is an icon. She is a statue of gold and lead. She is the most powerful woman in Europe, but she is also a prisoner of her own image. The clock strikes 9:30 a.m. The heavy doors of the Privy Chamber are about to open. The world is waiting for the Queen. But as she takes her first shallow, laboured step toward the door, she feels the full 40 pounds of the crown's burden. It is not just the weight of the velvet. It is the weight of every soul in England resting on her constricted, aching shoulders. The great silence of the morning is over. The grind of the Tudor court has begun. The 11th hour of the morning brings a shift in the palace atmosphere. The private, hushed sanctuary of the bedchamber is left behind as Elizabeth moves toward the council chamber. As she glides through the corridors, the weight of the wardrobe creates a rhythmic, heavy swish, thump of velvet against stone. But inside the room where the business of England is conducted, the air is different. It is thick, stagnant, and carries the sharp, acidic tang of iron gall ink and the dry, dusty scent of 1,000 parchment scrolls. This is the nerve centre of a kingdom under siege. In 1588, the great silence of the night has been replaced by the frantic, mechanical scratching of quill pens. To an Elizabethan, this is the sound of survival. As Elizabeth takes her seat at the head of the long oak table, the sensory grit factor is overwhelming. In 2026, we are used to the sterile smell of digital offices, but the 16th century council chamber smells of biology and bureaucracy. There is the scent of the men, Lord Burghley and Francis Walsingham, who have been working since dawn. It is the smell of unwashed wool, heavy sweat, and the faint, sweet rot of the rushes on the floor. But cutting through it all is the metallic, almost sour aroma of the ink. Elizabethan ink was made from oak galls and iron salts. It has a biting, chemical edge that stays in the back of the throat. Every time a clerk dips a quill and scrawls a name, that scent rises. It is the smell of power, of taxes, and of death warrants. The biography of Elizabeth I in this moment is one of existential dread. At the table sits Francis Walsingham, her spymaster. He is a man who lives in the shadows, a man who has built the most sophisticated intelligence network in Europe. Across from him lie the maps of the English Channel. The threat is no longer a rumour. It is a horizon filled with sails. King Philip II of Spain has launched his invincible armada, 130 ships, 8,000 sailors, and 18,000 soldiers. Their goal is simple: to sail to the Netherlands, pick up a massive invasion force, and land on the coast of Kent to topple the heretic queen. Elizabeth sits at the head of this table, her white lead mask catching the light of the flickering candles. To her advisors, she is the indomitable lioness. But the reality check of 1588 is that she is a woman surrounded by spies. Reports are filled with whispers of Jesuit assassins and English Catholics, ready to rise up the moment a Spanish boot touches the sand. She knows that even in this room, every word is a gamble. Every man at this table is watching her for a sign of wavering, a sign of the feeble woman the world expects her to be. While the men debate naval or army logistics, the boring history reality of Elizabeth's physical state is reaching a breaking point. The 40-pound gown is pressing the corset's wooden busk into her ribs, but there is a sharper, more intimate pain radiating through her jaw. Elizabeth has a legendary love for sugar. In the Tudor court, sugar was a status symbol, expensive, rare, and imported from the New World. She consumes it in her wine, her marchpane, and her preserved fruits. The result is a medical nightmare. By 1588, her teeth are black and decaying. As she opens her mouth to speak, the grit factor is visceral. The cold air hits the exposed nerves of her rotting molars. The pain is a constant throbbing presence that sharpens her temper. When she speaks, her voice is not the smooth, melodic tone of a Hollywood actress. It is sharp, high-pitched and impatient. She snaps at Walsingham, her words cutting through the room like a blade. She often keeps a lace handkerchief or a fan near her face, not just for fashion, but to catch the scent of the decay that her own breath carries. A secret she must hide from the ambassadors who look for any sign of English rot. Listen to the room. Audio cue, the rhythmic, aggressive scratching of several quills on dry paper. That sound is the 16th century version of a ticking clock. Every letter Walsingham writes is a life or death decision. He is decoding letters from his double agents in the Spanish court, written in complex ciphers. Elizabeth watches the pens move. She knows that a signature on a single piece of parchment can send an army to Tilbury or a traitor to the rack. She is a woman of intellect who speaks 6 languages, and she uses that intellect as a weapon to distract from her physical fragility. She switches from English to Latin to Italian, keeping her advisors on their toes. She demands to know the exact tonnage of the Spanish galleons. She questions the grain supplies for her own troops. She is a micromanager born of trauma. She knows that a single mistake in a ledger can lead to a gap in the coastline. There is a strange, heavy silence that falls over the room whenever the Queen pauses to think. In that silence, the great silence of her loneliness returns. Here she is, 55 years old, the last of her line. Her father, Henry VIII, left her a divided, bankrupt nation. She has spent 30 years trying to mend it, and now the most powerful empire on earth is coming to take it all away. She looks at Walsingham. He is the man who finally pushed her to execute her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, just a year prior. Elizabeth still has nightmares about that execution, about the blood on the cloth and the breach of the divinity of kings. She is haunted by the fact that if she falls, there is no one to take her place. She is the stopgap between England and chaos. The council meeting stretches toward midday. The room grows hotter. The smell of the metallic ink becomes cloying. Elizabeth's back is screaming from the weight of the pearls, and the lead makeup is starting to feel like a drying, cracking shell. But she does not move. She does not flinch. She is the sun in the room, and the men around her are like planets, held in place by the gravity of her sheer will. They see the gold, they see the red hair, and they hear the sharp, commanding voice. They do not see the blackening teeth. They do not feel the wooden busk bruising her skin. As the bells of London begin to toll for noon, Elizabeth stands. The meeting is adjourned. She is given the orders. The ships will sail. The spies will continue their work. She has maintained the mask of state for another 4 hours. As she leaves the room, the scratching of the quills stops for a brief moment of respect. She walks out into the sunlight of the great hall, her head held high, her face a white porcelain mask of defiance. The Spanish may be coming, but today they have already lost. They are fighting a woman who has turned her own pain into a throne. The air in the council chamber had become a stagnant soup of ink and anxiety. At 1 o'clock, Elizabeth makes the strategic decision to move. She does not simply go for a walk. She performs a royal progress through the gardens of Whitehall. This is a public display of vitality, designed to crush the rumours that the Queen is failing, that she is tired, or that the weight of the Spanish threat has bent her spine. As she emerges from the stone archway into the afternoon light, the great silence of the palace interior is replaced by the chaotic, sensory symphony of Elizabethan London. The first thing Elizabeth feels is the moisture. In 1588, the English mist isn't just weather, it's a living entity. It clings to the heavy crimson velvet of her oversleeves, turning the fabric into a leaden sponge. Velvet is a thirsty material, and within minutes of walking, the hem of her gown, already weighted with pearls, begins to drag even heavier as it absorbs the dampness of the air and the dew of the grass. Underneath the mask of state, her skin begins to prickle. The vinegar and lead paste she applied hours ago is reacting to the humidity. It doesn't wash away. Instead, it feels like a damp, tightening second skin. The grit factor here is the sheer physical effort of her movement. To the courtiers watching from the gallery, she appears to glide, a golden icon moving through a sea of green. But beneath the skirts, her legs are working with the intensity of a soldier's. Every step requires her to lift 30 pounds of sodden fabric, all while maintaining the stiff, conical posture dictated by her wooden corset. Whitehall's gardens are a triumph of Tudor geometry. They are not gardens, intricate patterns of boxwood hedges filled with fragrant herbs. Rosemary for remembrance, lavender for sleep, and the heavy, sweet scent of damask roses. For a few seconds, the perfume is intoxicating. It is the smell of a queen's paradise. But the reality check of the 16th century is never more than a breeze away. As the wind shifts off the River Thames, the scent of the roses is violently interrupted by the great stink. Whitehall sits directly on the river, which serves as the primary artery for London's waste. There are no underground sewers here, only open kennels or gutters that run through the palace precincts, carrying a slurry of kitchen waste, animal entrails, and human refuse toward the water. This is the sensory paradox of Elizabeth's life. Her nose is filled with the finest rosewater imported from the East, while her silk-clad feet are mere inches away from the stagnant filth of a city of 200,000 people. She does not flinch. To be a Tudor is to accept that beauty and rot are inseparable. She walks with her head held high, the metallic scent of her lead makeup mixing with the foul river air, creating a chemical cocktail that she breathes in with every shallow, constricted inhale. As she walks, her ladies-in-waiting follow at a respectful distance, like a flock of colourful birds trailing a phoenix. Elizabeth is acutely aware of the eyes upon her. This is the height of the Gloriana cult. She has spent decades carefully curating her image as the Virgin Queen, the Mother of England, who has no husband but the sea and no children but her subjects. The biography of this moment is one of calculated loneliness. Her advisors, particularly Cecil, have spent years begging her to marry, to name an heir, to provide stability for the realm. Her refusal is her greatest weapon and her heaviest burden. By remaining the Virgin, she remains the ultimate prize in European diplomacy. To name an heir would be to sign her own death warrant. In the Tudor world, people stop looking at the setting sun once the new one begins to rise. She looks at the roses, knowing that she is the last of her line. When she dies, the House of Tudor dies with her. It is a staggering psychological weight. She is a woman who has traded the intimacy of a family for the immortality of a legend. She is Gloriana, the Sun Queen. But in the 1 p.m. greyness, she's also a 55-year-old woman with aching joints, damp sleeves, and the knowledge that she is the end of the road. She picks up her pace. Elizabeth was famous for her brisk walking style, often outwalking her younger courtiers until they were breathless. It is a performance. If she can walk faster than a man half her age, she is still fit to rule. If she can endure the damp chill without a cloak, she is still the Iron Queen. Listen to the sound of her progress. It isn't the light footfalls of a girl. It is the heavy, purposeful strike of a monarch. She passes a group of young nobles who bow low, their faces filled with a mix of awe and terror. She grants them a brief, tight-lipped smile, careful not to show the blackened teeth that remain her most guarded secret. The grit of this walk is the realization that she is never off. Even here, in the supposed peace of the garden, she is on a stage. The damp English air clings to her red wig, the moisture making the curls heavy and limp. The wooden busk of her corset is now slick with a thin layer of sweat, chafing against her skin. As she turns back toward the palace, the great silence of the stone walls seems more appealing than the beauty of the garden. She has shown herself. She has proven her health. She has maintained the myth. But as she steps back into the shadows of the great hall, she feels a shiver that has nothing to do with the wind. The Armada is still out there. The lead is still in her blood. And the reality check of being Elizabeth is that the higher you build the icon, the further there is to fall. As the clock in the Great Hall strikes 4, the long shadows of the late afternoon begin to stretch across the rush-covered floors of the Privy Chamber. The dampness Elizabeth brought in from the gardens has begun to evaporate, leaving a faint, earthy scent of wet wool and cedar. This is the hour of the private repast, a moment of supposed relaxation that in reality is the theatre for one of the Queen's most dangerous and intimate addictions. In 2026, we understand that power often comes with a hidden cost. For Elizabeth I, that cost was measured in the refined, sparkling crystals of the New World. Sugar. Elizabeth sits at a small, velvet-draped table. Before her lies a collection of sweetmeats, delicacies that were the ultimate status symbol of the Tudor era. There are preserved cherries, ginger roots boiled in syrup, and marchpane, marzipan moulded into the shapes of intricate flowers and royal animals. The biography of this meal is a biography of empire. The sugar on this table has travelled thousands of miles from the newly established plantations in the Americas and the West Indies. In 1588, sugar was more than a seasoning. It was a white gold that only the highest echelons of society could afford. To consume it in vast quantities was to signal that you were the master of the trade routes, the sovereign of the seas. But for Elizabeth, this luxury has become a biological poison. Throughout her reign, her love for confections has been legendary. She doesn't just eat sugar, she craves the sharp, immediate hit of sweetness to mask the stress of her council meetings and the lingering metallic taste of the lead makeup in her throat. Listen to that sound. It is the signature sound of a Tudor afternoon. Elizabeth picks up a piece of sucket, fruit preserved in heavy syrup and then dried until it forms a hard, sugary crust. As she bites down, the grit factor is an immediate, agonizing reality check. The sugar crystals crunch against her molars, but the sweetness is followed instantly by a jolt of white-hot pain. By 1588, Elizabeth's dental health is a disaster. The years of sugar consumption have carved deep, dark cavities into her teeth. In an era before modern dentistry, her molars are blackened stumps, their nerves exposed and raw. Every bite is a gamble. The sugar provides the energy she needs to finish her day, but the sweet poison is physically dismantling her jaw. The pain radiates up into her temples. intensifying the headaches she often attributes to the weight of the crown. Yet, she cannot stop. The addiction is as much a part of her as the red wig or the white lead. Even here, in her private chambers with only her most trusted ladies, the mask of state never truly drops. Elizabeth is acutely aware of the boring history detail that defines her later years. Her breath. The decay in her mouth creates a persistent, foul odour, a scent of rot that no amount of rosewater can fully hide. When she laughs or speaks too animatedly, she has developed a specialised royal reflex. She raises a fine, lace-edged handkerchief or a small painted silk fan to her face. This isn't just a gesture of modesty, it's a strategic defence of her image. To the outside world, she is the fairy queen, an immortal, pristine being. To allow anyone to see the black, jagged reality behind her lips would be to reveal that she is, after all, just a mortal woman aging toward the grave. The grit of this moment is the loneliness of it. Imagine eating a meal where every bite causes pain and every smile must be censored. She sips a cup of heavy, spiced wine, also sweetened with more sugar, to wash away the grit of the crystals. The wine is warm, providing a brief, numbing comfort to her gums, but it only feeds the bacteria that are slowly winning the war against her health. As she finishes her repast, Elizabeth looks at the empty silver tray. The sugar is gone, leaving only a few sparkling grains on the velvet cloth. Her heart rate is slightly elevated from the sugar. Her temper, a bit more volatile. This is the hidden reality of 1588. While the history books focus on the cannons of the Armada and the speeches at Tilbury, the Queen's daily life is a constant management of physical decay. She's the sun around which England orbits, but that sun is fueled by a toxic, sugary fire that is burning her from the inside out. The great silence of the afternoon is settling in. The ladies begin to clear the plates, their movements hushed and respectful. Elizabeth leans back, the wooden busk of her corset still pressing firmly against her ribs, her jaw throbbing with a dull, persistent ache. She has survived another meal. She has maintained the myth. But the reality check remains. The Queen of England is a woman who can command an ocean, but she cannot command her own body to stop craving the very thing that is destroying it. The 8th hour of the night marks the end of the performance. As the heavy oak doors of the privy chamber swing shut, the great silence of the palace interior rushes back in, swallowing the echoes of the day's politics. Elizabeth is finally back within the inner sanctum, the only place on earth where the icon is allowed to become a woman again. But for a Tudor queen, taking off the day is not a simple act of rest. It is a grueling, often painful reversal of the morning's construction. The first step of the unmasking is the removal of the £40 gown. As the ladies of the bedchamber unpin the heavy velvet and silk, Elizabeth feels a sudden, jarring lightness. But the grit factor is the immediate chill. The gown had acted as a thick insulation. Once it is removed, the damp cold air of Whitehall, which even the hearth cannot fully warm, clings to her linen smock. Next comes the corset. When the laces are finally loosened, the release is almost violent. After 14 hours of the wooden busk crushing her ribs, the sudden expansion of her lungs causes a sharp, stinging rush of blood back into constricted tissues. She takes her first deep breath since 7 a.m., but it is a shaky, laboured one. Her ribs are likely bruised, her skin marked with the deep indentations of the laces. Now, she sits before the steel mirror once more for the most visceral part of the unmasking, the removal of the mask of state. To dissolve the Venetian ceruse, the thick white lead paste, her ladies use linen cloths soaked in harsh wine vinegar or rose water. The sensation is a reality check that would break most modern spirits. As the vinegar hits her face, it begins to cut through the lead, but it also bites into the skin beneath. Because the lead is toxic and corrosive, it has spent the day slowly eating away at the queen's epidermis. Removing it is not like washing off modern makeup. It is more like scrubbing a wound. As the layers of white are wiped away, the grit is revealed. Elizabeth's natural skin is not the porcelain of her portraits. It is a sallow, sickly grey, a direct result of lead poisoning. The vinegar leaves her face raw, red, and stinging. The smallpox scars, once filled with paste, now appear as deep, hollow pits in the candlelight. She looks into the mirror and sees a ghost staring back. A woman whose very quest for eternal beauty is turning her into a living corpse. Then, the wig is removed. The vibrant copper-red curls that have become her signature are lifted away, revealing the boring history, reality underneath. By 1588, Elizabeth's natural hair is very thin, a casualty of both her age and the toxic fumes of the lead and mercury she wears daily. What remains is a few wisps of grey and white hair. Without the wig, her face looks smaller, older, and infinitely more fragile. The Gloriana of the garden, progress is gone. In her place sits a tired 55-year-old woman whose scalp itches from the heavy hairpiece and whose eyes are red-rimmed from the sting of the vinegar fumes. As she sits in her shifts, the loneliness of her 44-year reign begins to fill the room. In the great silence of the night, the ghosts of her past find their way through the tapestries. She thinks of Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, the one man she might have truly loved, the man who died just months ago, shortly after the Armada's defeat. She kept his final letter in a casket by her bed until her own death, labelled his last letter. In this moment, the Virgin Queen isn't a political title. It is a profound, hollow ache. She chose the throne over the man, and now the throne is the only thing left in the room. And then there is the ghost of Mary, Queen of Scots. It has been only a year since Elizabeth finally signed Mary's death warrant. Despite their rivalry, Mary was a queen, a cousin, and a fellow sovereign. By executing her, Elizabeth broke the divinity of kings, proving that even a royal head can fall. In the shadows of the bedchamber, she wonders if she too will eventually pay that blood price. She remembers her mother, Anne Boleyn, and the silent, terrifying symmetry of their lives. Elizabeth is the last of the Tudors. She has outlived her siblings, her enemies, and most of her friends. She has no heir to carry on the name. The grit of her biography is the realization that she has spent her entire life building an empire that will pass to the son of the woman she executed. She kneels for her evening prayers. The stone floor is cold against her knees. She prays for the safety of England, for the souls of those she has lost, and perhaps for the strength to put the mask back on tomorrow morning. The reality check of 8 p.m. is that being a queen is a form of slow, methodical martyrdom. She has traded her skin, her hair, her teeth, and her heart for the survival of a nation. as her ladies lead her towards the massive four-poster bed. The great silence settles over her like a shroud. The lead is out of her blood for a few hours. The corset is off. The wig is on its stand. For a brief moment, she is not the son of England. She's just a woman, alone in the dark, waiting for the raking light of 5 a.m. to start the construction all over again. The midnight hour at Whitehall Palace is not merely a measurement of time, it is a physical weight. As the final beeswax candle in the Queen's bedchamber is snuffed out, the great silence of the 16th century descends with absolute authority. In 2026, we are rarely afforded the experience of true prehistoric darkness, the kind that feels thick against the skin. But for Elizabeth Tudor, this is the final, inevitable chapter of every day. The grit factor of this moment lies in the sensory transition. The sharp, acrid scent of the candle smoke lingers for a moment. A grey ribbon of soot curling toward the timbered ceiling, before being swallowed by the omnipresent smell of the stone and the Thames. Listen to the room now. Without the rustle of silk or the scratching of quills, the palace begins to speak. There is the rhythmic, low-frequency crackle of the hearth, the only source of light left in the room. It is a dying fire, the logs settling into white-hot ash, occasionally popping with a sharp, percussive snap that echoes against the oak-panelled walls. Outside the leaded glass windows, the wind moves across the river. The Thames in 1588 is not the managed waterway of the modern era. It is a dark, churning force of nature. You can hear it lashing against the stone embankments of the palace, a cold, wet sound that underscores the isolation of the woman lying within the four-poster bed. This is the boring history reality of royal sleep. Despite the velvet quilts and the linen sheets, the air in the room is bitingly cold. Elizabeth lies propped up on several large, goose-down bolsters. Standard for the era, as sleeping completely flat was often associated with the position of a corpse. Her jaw, still throbbing from the sweet poison of her afternoon meal, begins to settle into a dull, manageable ache. The mask of state is gone, her skin feels raw and exposed, and for the next 5 hours, she is no longer an icon. She is simply a weary survivor. As the darkness settles, the biography of her reign takes on a different shape. Elizabeth lies there, the last of the Tudors, reflecting on the world she has built from the ruins. When she took the throne in 1558, England was a bankrupt, divided island, torn apart by the religious fires of her sister Mary's reign. It was a nation of shadows and debt, mocked by the great powers of Europe. Now, 30 years later, she has performed a miracle of statecraft. She has stabilised the Church of England, navigating a middle way that, while far from perfect, prevented the total collapse into civil war. She has funded the voyages of men like Drake and Raleigh, turning her eyes toward the New World and laying the foundation for a global maritime empire that will endure for centuries. Most importantly, in this year of 1588, she has stood against the greatest military force on earth, the Spanish Armada, and watched as the winds of the Atlantic and the grit of her sailors broke the back of an empire. She has taken a kingdom that was a footnote in history and turned it into the centre of the world. She has become Gloriana, the Sun Queen, the woman who proved that a female monarch could not only rule, but could define an entire age. But the reality check of midnight is that every empire has its price. To unify England, Elizabeth had to sacrifice her own humanity. She chose to be the Virgin Queen, so that she would never have to surrender her power to a king. She chose the mask of state, so that her people would never see her bleed. The silence of the palace is the silence of a woman who has outlived everyone she ever loved. Robert Dudley, the man who was her heart, is gone. Her enemies are gone. Even the ghosts of the tower, her mother, her sister, seem to have retreated into the cold stone. She is the final, flickering flame of the Tudor line. The grit of this legacy is the knowledge that within a few hours, the great silence will be broken by the raking light of 5 a.m. The ladies will return. The lead will be applied. The gown will be laced. The icon will be reconstructed. But for now, there is only the river. There is only the fire. There is only the breath of a queen, shallow and rhythmic, moving in the dark. She has done what no one thought she could. She has survived. She has ruled. She has won. The world will remember her name long after the stone of Whitehall has crumbled back into the mud of the Thames. The 24-hour reality check is over. The Queen is at rest. The legend remains. Take one last deep breath of the cold palace air. Let the sound of the crackling logs and the distant wind carry you into the same darkness that once sheltered the last Tudor. The history is written. The day is done. Good night.